8 years after military service and a life-altering IED injury, Ethan retreats to his late grandmother's cabin, seeking solitude. A snowstorm changes everything when an injured dog Rex appears at his door, dragging him into a mystery of a missing mining heir, a kidnapped veteran, and long-buried family secrets. Together, they follow clues through the frozen wilderness, facing a ruthless adversary, and uncovering a legacy of courage, love, and justice. If you're ready for a story of loyalty, bravery, and revelation like this, video subscribe and stay with us for the full journey. Ethan Cole hadn't heard a human voice in 3 weeks. The silence had become a kind of companion, thick, predictable, a weight he could lean on. The snow outside his cabin fell in sheets, swallowing the mountains, the road, and every trace of the world he'd left behind. Inside, the wood stove hissed and popped, throwing orange light across the faded photographs on the wall. Men in desert fatigues, the dust of Kandahar on their faces. Ethan's hand lingered on one of them. 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, all smiling except him. His mouth moved as if trying to remember how to form the words of a joke he once knew. But the memory ended before it began. The storm outside deepened. The wind clawed at the window frames. He reached for his coffee, black and cold, and leaned back in his chair, the floor creaking beneath the weight of solitude. A faint hum filled the cabin, the generator in the back shed coughing every few minutes. It reminded him of his own lungs, scarred from dust and smoke and sand. Then it came. A sound so soft at first he thought it was just the wood settling, a dull scraping noise. Once, twice, then again closer this time. He froze. His instincts honed through years of war, cut through the fog of isolation. The sound wasn't wood. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate. He stood every nerve alive, eyes narrowing towards the front door. The scraping came again, steady, rhythmic. Someone or something was there. He moved quietly, his boots whispering against the floorboards. His hand brushed the hunting rifle by the door, but he didn't lift it yet. He unlatched the lock, the metal clicking like a heartbeat. When he opened the door, the wind punched through him. The night was a blur of white, and for a moment he saw nothing but storm. Then he looked down. A German shepherd lay on the steps, fur-matted with snow, a dark stain spreading beneath him. The animal's eyes were open, glazed with pain but alive. Ethan's first instinct was to close the door. The cold would kill them both if he lingered. But the dog whimpered a soft sound that cracked something deep inside him, something he'd built walls around since the desert. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, crouching. The dog flinched but didn't growl. Ethan's breath hung between them, visible in the icy air. He noticed the rope around its neck frayed and crusted with blood. Whoever had owned this dog hadn't just lost him. They'd tried to kill him. "You're one lucky bastard," he said under his breath, scooping the animal into his arms. The dog's body was heavier than it looked. The warmth of its blood seeped through his flannel shirt as he kicked the door shut behind him. Inside, the storm became a muffled whisper again. Ethan laid the dog on an old quilt near the stove. The smell of iron and wet fur filled the room. He grabbed his first aid kit, the same one he'd used on men in places no map could name. His hands, once steady under gunfire, trembled now as he cleaned the wound. The cut along the dog's side was clean, too clean. Not claws, not teeth, a knife. The rope had rubbed the skin raw under its jaw. Ethan muttered quietly, "Someone did this to you." The dog's eyes flicked up at his voice, brown and glassy, but focused. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, I know the feeling." He poured water from the kettle, wiping away the dried blood. Each motion became muscle memory, bandage pressure, antiseptic. The dog didn't fight him. It just watched, silent, as if measuring the man who'd pulled him from the cold. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere deep in the storm. Ethan sat back, breathing hard. His reflection in the window stared back at him, a man with unshaven cheeks, eyes dulled by loss, the lines of war carved into his face. He saw himself in the animal, broken, bleeding, still breathing, because the world hadn't finished with him yet. He leaned closer to check the dog's tag, nothing but a strip of torn leather. "Guess you're nobody's now," he said. The dog stirred faintly, letting out a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl. Ethan gave a low chuckle. "Fine, we'll change that." He pushed himself up, tossed another log into the fire, and watched the sparks spiral up the chimney. "Rex," he said, suddenly testing the name aloud. The dog's ears twitched ever so slightly. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "You look like Rex." The storm roared again outside, but inside the cabin the noise softened into something almost peaceful. Ethan sank into the chair beside the fire, staring at the flames until his vision blurred. He didn't realize he was talking until he heard his own voice. "Don't die on me tonight, Rex." He closed his eyes. Not tonight. The dog's breathing steadied slow and shallow. The firelight flickered against the walls, illuminating the metals gathering dust on a shelf. The symbols of a life built on survival and sacrifice. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of ice, but Ethan didn't move. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the storm. By morning, the storm had quieted into a whisper. The trees outside the cabin stood heavy with snow branches sagging under the weight of it. The world had turned white and still, as if holding its breath. Inside, the air was thick with the faint smell of antiseptic and wet fur. Ethan stirred awake in his chair, his neck stiff, his shirt still stained with dried blood that wasn't his. The German Shepherd lay curled on the rug near the stove chest, rising and falling in mild uneven rhythm. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He just watched the dog breathe that fragile rhythm of something he hadn't expected to protect. "Still with me, huh?" he muttered. The dog's ear twitched. It was enough. Ethan leaned forward, checking the bandage he'd wrapped the night before. The bleeding had stopped, but up close he saw something new. A set of small, faded stitch marks just below the collarbone, neat and deliberate, like they'd been done by a professional. Not an accident, not some farm dog. "You've seen some shit, haven't you?" he said quietly. "Looks like we've both been patched up by people who ran out of miracles." He reached for his mug, the coffee inside cold and bitter. He took a sip anyway, his eyes never leaving the shepherd. "Rex," he said again, this time not to test the name, but to keep it. "That's you now." Rex lifted his head, blinking at him. His gaze was sharp, alert, too human. For a second, Ethan felt a flicker of recognition, like looking into another soldier's eyes after a long firefight. The kind of silent understanding that didn't need words. The wind groaned against the cabin walls, and Rex's head turned instantly, ears pricking toward the west window. Ethan followed his gaze, but there was nothing beyond the frost, just pine and white. Still, Rex didn't look away. He gave a low growl, soft but certain, like a warning to something unseen. "Relax," Ethan said, standing. "There's nothing out there." But Rex's body stayed tense. Muscles coiled, eyes locked on that invisible point beyond the tree line. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You're jumpy as I am," he muttered, pulling on his jacket. Outside, the cold slapped his lungs awake. He shoveled a path to the shed, the kind of mindless work that steadied him. His hands were numb by the time he reached the back fence, a weathered line of wood posts half buried in snow. He bent to fix one of the rails and froze. Something metallic glinted in the snow. He brushed the frost away with his glove and lifted it, a bullet casing tarnished green with age. 5.56 caliber. Military issue. He turned it in his fingers, the familiar weight stirring an ache in his chest. It wasn't uncommon for hunters to use similar rounds, but the stamping was distinct, LC09. Lake City government manufactured. It didn't belong here. Ethan slipped it into his pocket, scanning the woods beyond the fence. The stillness felt heavier now, as if the forest were watching him back. When he returned to the cabin, Rex was standing by the window, tail low, staring toward the same direction. "You're trying to tell me something," Ethan said softly. Rex glanced at him, then back toward the trees. The fire crackled. Ethan crouched beside him and ran his hand over the dog's neck, fingers brushing through the thick fur. That's when he felt it, a rough patch near the shoulder, something embedded under the top layer of hair. He parted the fur carefully and pulled free a small scrap of fabric stiff with dirt and old blood. There were letters printed on it, half faded but legible, H. Harper Mining Company. Ethan frowned. He'd seen that name before, somewhere on a sign years ago along the highway near the southern ridge. The old Harper mines had shut down decades ago after a cave-in. He'd heard stories of lawsuits, missing workers, a family feud that left the land poisoned and forgotten. "What the hell were you doing near a mine?" he murmured. Rex sat still watching him, as if waiting for the next question. Ethan turned the fabric over, noting the torn edge like it had been ripped from a uniform or maybe a work jacket. He placed it on the table beside the bullet casing, both glinting under the weak light. Evidence of something. Of someone. The thought gnawed at him. He told himself to leave it alone. Not his problem. He'd promised himself that after the war he wouldn't go chasing ghosts anymore. But then he looked at Rex, at the scars, the stitched flesh, the way the dog's gaze kept pulling westward. It wasn't random. The rope around his neck, the cut that looked like a blade, the tag that wasn't there. Somebody had tried to silence this dog, and whoever it was, they'd done it near that ridge. Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, pacing near the stove. He could feel the air shifting that strange hum before a choice you can't unmake. He stared out the frosted window again. The world beyond was gray and endless, but somewhere past those trees, something waited. Something the dog remembered, and he didn't. He looked back at Rex. "You're not going to drop this, are you?" Rex blinked once, slow and steady like an answer. Ethan's pulse ticked in his throat. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or instinct that moved him, but he reached for his boots anyway. The fabric scrap lay on the table beside the casing, quiet, harmless, and yet it felt like a door had cracked open between the past and whatever was coming next. He grabbed his coat, his rifle, and paused by the fire. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "Let's see what's out there." The dog rose to his feet, limping slightly, but ready. Ethan opened the door, and the cold came rushing in again, biting relentless. The snow had started falling anew, small flakes drifting down like ashes. Rex stepped into it first, nose to the wind, moving with purpose, his gaze fixed once more toward the west. The storm broke with the kind of silence that made the world feel newly made. Ethan stepped outside just after dawn, his breath rising in thin clouds, his boots sinking into fresh snow that hadn't yet hardened. The air was still sharp, alive, with the faint crackle of ice shifting under sunlight. Behind him, Rex limped out of the cabin, head low, but eyes alert, his body carrying the tension of purpose. The snow stretched wide before them, untouched, except for the faint path they'd made the night before. Ethan hesitated, his fingers brushing the rifle strap across his chest. He'd told himself this was just curiosity, just a morning walk to clear his head, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. Something had been calling from the west, the same direction that haunted the dog's gaze, and now that the sky had opened, he couldn't ignore it anymore. "You lead soldier," he muttered, nodding toward the trees. Rex gave a short whine, nose twitching to the wind, then started forward. The dog's pace was measured but steady, his steps deliberate, as though every footprint carried memory. Ethan followed close behind, boots crunching softly. The forest around them felt ancient, its tall pines draped in white veils, the light filtering through them like fractured glass. For a while, there was only the rhythm of breath and snow, and then the world began to whisper again, branches cracking under frost, the faint groan of wind curling through the valley. Ethan's mind drifted to the desert, to the sound of sand shifting beneath boots, to the patrols that always ended in smoke. He shook it off, focusing instead on the dog. "You sure about this, Rex?" he said quietly. The shepherd didn't look back. His ears flicked once, acknowledging the voice, but his stride never broke. After an hour, the forest thinned, and the land began to slope downward. That was when Ethan saw the first marker, a wooden post jutting from the snow, worn gray, with age its top painted with a faded stripe of red. He brushed the snow away and saw the letters carved into it, HH-2. Mining claim markers. He remembered the name on the scrap of fabric in his pocket. Tch. Harper Mining Company. It wasn't a coincidence. Rex sniffed the post, then barked once, sharp and sudden. Ethan turned, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. Easy, he said, though his hand drifted toward his rifle out of habit. They kept moving, weaving between the skeletal remains of machinery half buried in snow, old winches' rusted rails, a collapsed shaft mouth, sealed with planks, the remnants of a forgotten world. This place shouldn't even exist anymore, Ethan muttered. His voice sounded strange against the cold swallowed by it. As they rounded a bend near a cluster of pines, Rex stopped. His body stiffened, tail rigid, nose pressing to the ground. Ethan's pulse jumped. "What is it?" he asked, stepping closer. Then he saw it. A line in the snow, subtle but clear, stretching from the tree line toward the ridge. It wasn't a trail made by an animal. It was too deep, too erratic. The snow was scuffed, disturbed in wide swaths with small, dark spots staining the surface. Ethan knelt down, touching one of the marks. The blood was dried, faintly brown. Something or someone had been dragged through here, recently. He looked up at Rex, whose hackles had risen. The dog growled low, a rumble that vibrated through the cold. "Tracks are fresh," Ethan murmured, scanning the direction they led. The drag marks cut across the clearing, disappearing into denser forest ahead. He stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "We're not alone out here." They followed the trail, careful, silent. Every few feet, Ethan glanced behind them, half expecting movement. But there was nothing, only the echo of his heartbeat in the quiet. The smell of pine grew stronger. As the ground rose again, the snow thinner here, under the cover of tall trees. Rex stayed low, ears forward, nose close to the earth. He moved with precision, stopping every few paces, testing the air. Ethan had seen men track with less discipline. The trail climbed a short hill, then opened into a narrow valley where the light dimmed. The drag marks were clearer now, carving through the powder like a wound. At the crest of the hill, Ethan stopped to catch his breath and froze. Ahead, nestled between two boulders, was a cabin. Not like his, a smaller, older thing built from rough-hewn logs darkened with age. A wisp of smoke coiled from its chimney, dissolving into the cold air. For a heartbeat, it didn't register. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant someone alive. But the snow around it was untouched. No footprints, no tracks leading in or out. Ethan's throat tightened. His eyes traced the perimeter, the roofline, the shadows beneath the eaves. Nothing moved. The only sound was the faint creak of wood shifting under heat. "You smell that," he whispered. Rex's nose lifted and he gave a single bark, then stopped, body tense as wire. Ethan's fingers brushed his rifle again. Everything about the scene was wrong. The fresh smoke, the unbroken snow, the dragging trail that ended just shy of the door. He took a step forward, boots sinking deep, heart pounding hard enough to hear. "Stay close," he said. Rex moved beside him, each step measured. They crossed the final stretch of clearing. The closer they got, the thicker the smell of burned pine became. Ethan paused at the door, his breath clouding the air. He listened. Nothing. No movement inside. No voices. Just the faint crackle of fire and the slow, rhythmic hiss of wind slipping through the gaps in the wood. His gloved hand touched the doorframe. It was warm. Someone had been here recently. Maybe it still was. He glanced down at Rex, who stared back up at him, ears forward, waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the rifle on his shoulder, and the pull of something deeper, the same instinct that had driven him into every battle he swore he'd never fight again. He reached for the latch. Ethan's hand lingered on the latch, his breath clouding the air as his pulse thudded against the silence. The door didn't budge. When he pushed, it was locked. From the outside, a thick chain looped through a rusted iron ring. He frowned. People locked doors to keep things out, not in. His instincts sharpened. He stepped back, scanning the hinges, the frame, the pattern of frost clinging to the wood. The chain wasn't new. The metal bore scuff marks, faint but fresh, like it had been handled recently. Whoever lived here had tried to make sure nothing escaped. Rex circled behind him, growling low. Ethan crouched, slipping a small pry tool from his pack. He wedged it into the gap near the padlock, working by feel. The cold bit through his gloves, his breath short. It took less than a minute. The lock snapped open with a muted pop. He unhooked the chain carefully, eyes flicking toward the stillness inside. The smell hit him first. Damp wood sweat, something sour and metallic. He pushed the door open, rifle raised. The interior was dim, lit only by the flicker of a small fire struggling in a stone hearth. Dust motes floated in the air like ghosts. The cabin was one room, cluttered but sparse. A small table, an overturned chair, a stack of papers half burned in a metal bucket. Then he saw the bed. Against the far wall, a man lay sprawled beneath a threadbare blanket. His wrists were cuffed to the headboard, skin rubbed raw where the metal had bitten through. His hair was white, and tangled, his face hollowed by weeks, maybe months of neglect. Ethan felt the cold crawl deeper into his bones. He lowered the rifle, moving closer. The old man's lips were cracked, and purple, his breath shallow. His eyes fluttered open as Ethan leaned over him, the pupils unfocused but alive. For a heartbeat, he looked terrified. "Hey," Ethan said softly, his voice low and steady, the tone he used with wounded men overseas. "You're safe. I'm not here to hurt you." The man's throat worked dry and rasping. Who are you, Ethan?" he said, pulling a canteen from his belt. "Here, take it slow." The old man drank greedily water, spilling down his chin. When he stopped, his gaze darted toward the door, wild again. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered every word, trembling. "He'll come back. He always comes back." Ethan's shoulders tightened. "Who?" The man's lips trembled. "Derek?" The name came out like a curse. Don't let Derek see you here." Ethan glanced toward the door, his senses on edge. "All right," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We'll talk about Derek later. First, we need to get these off." He examined the cuffs, old police issue, reinforced steel. The keys weren't anywhere in sight. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a multi-tool, and set to work. The man flinched with each click of metal, his eyes darting toward the window, like he expected a shadow to move. "How long you been here?" Ethan asked. The man swallowed hard. "Days, maybe weeks. I don't know anymore." The cuffs finally gave with a sharp snap. The man's hands fell free, trembling violently. Ethan helped him sit up, supporting his back against the wall. "You got a name?" he asked. "Henry," the man said weakly. "Henry Harper." The name made Ethan pause. Harper. He reached into his pocket, feeling the scrap of fabric still there, the one from Rex's fur. "You, from Harper Mining?" Henry's eyes flicked to him wide and frightened. "You know about the mine?" "Just the name," Ethan said. "Found it on this dog." He gestured toward Rex, who was watching from the doorway, head tilted, ears forward. Henry's expression softened for a second, almost breaking. "Rex," he whispered. "You found him." The old man reached a trembling hand toward the dog, who stepped closer, sniffed his fingers, then pressed his head against them gently. The sound Henry made was half laugh, half sob. Ethan watched quietly. "You two know each other," he said, more a statement than a question. "He was mine," Henry murmured. "He's smarter than most men I've met. I thought he was gone." He looked up, tears glinting in the firelight. "Derek did this. He said I was senile, that I couldn't manage the company anymore. But it's my name on those deeds, my signature, he needs." Ethan frowned. "He's trying to steal your land." "Not just the land," Henry said, his voice cracking. "The gold. There's still gold under that ridge. I told him it should stay buried. We lost too many men in that mine already." His words began to blur as exhaustion overtook him. Ethan eased him back down, glancing around the room. There was no food except a half-empty can of beans on the table, no medical supplies, no phone. Whoever had locked Henry up hadn't intended for him to last long. His eyes swept the clutter again, and then he saw it. Beneath a pile of maps and crumpled receipts sat a leather-bound notebook, its spine cracked from use. He picked it up carefully, flipping through. Every page was covered in scrawled handwriting coordinates, sketches of tunnels and shafts. Dates ran down the margins, each one older than the last. Near the back, the writing grew frantic ink, blotting through the paper. One line stood alone, underlined, twice I won't sign. He can take my hands before I give him my name. Ethan closed the notebook slowly, feeling its weight in his palm. The air in the cabin had grown heavy, the fire dimming to embers. Henry had drifted into uneasy sleep, muttering something under his breath, something about fire, and the ground shaking, and the smell of smoke. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the worn pages in his hand, his reflection flickering in the window glass. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faintest echo of footsteps on snow, or maybe that was just memory pressing too close. He turned toward Rex, who was staring at the door tail, still body taut. The dog gave a soft growl, the kind that spoke of danger approaching. Ethan's hand went to his rifle. The sound came again, faint, deliberate. Someone was out there moving through the trees. Ethan froze by the window, the faint crunch of snow outside fading as quickly as it came. The sound could have been a branch breaking, or it could have been something or someone moving away. He waited a long moment, his pulse hammering against the silence until only the hiss of wind remained. When he finally turned back, Henry was half asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Rex lay beside the bed, head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the door, as though he expected it to open at any second. Ethan dragged a chair closer to the dying fire and opened the leather-bound journal again. The pages crackled faintly as he turned them. The handwriting cramped and uneven, the ink darkened by time and maybe fear. The first entries were straightforward notes about equipment failures, safety inspections, payroll. Then, somewhere around the middle, the tone changed. August 12th. Derek came again. Says the survey team found gold deeper in the north shaft. Wants to reopen. I told him the mine's cursed, but he only sees dollar signs. Caroline's accident should have been warning enough. Ethan frowned, flipping forward. The pages grew more erratic. Sentences began to splinter. October 2nd. He's been bringing strangers. Men I don't trust. They talk in low voices about shares and ownership papers. I hid the documents in the only place he'll never look. The next entry was blotched with water stains. November 19th. He took my phone. Cut the line to town. Said I was losing my mind, that I needed to rest. Locked me in my own cabin. Brought food once a day. Told me to think about signing. I told him I'd rather die first. Ethan exhaled slowly, the words sinking deep. He looked toward Henry, whose fragile chest rose and fell beneath the blanket. The man had been fighting for months, trapped by blood. Ethan turned another page, and something caught his eye. A single line, written in a steadier hand, different from the rest. If Rex lives, he'll find someone good, and someone who can help. Ethan blinked, reading it twice. The words felt almost impossible. He looked at the dog, whose ears twitched as though he understood his own mention. Guess you had a job to do, Ethan murmured. Rex lifted his head, blue eyes meeting his in that uncanny, deliberate way that had unnerved him since the first night. Ethan turned another page, running his thumb along the edge. The entries after that were more desperate. December 2nd? Snow came early. The firewood's low. Derek says it's my fault for being stubborn. He doesn't understand the claim isn't just about gold. There's something buried under that ridge that should never be disturbed. My old partner tried once. It cost him his life. That line snagged in Ethan's mind. Partner, ridge. He flipped back to the earlier entries, searching for a name, and found it scribbled halfway down a page, almost lost in the margin, David Cole. The words struck like a blow. He sat back, pulse stuttering. His father's name. He stared at the journal again, reading the entry in full. David and I surveyed the North Ridge in '98. Found a vein that ran deep under the Harper property line. He wanted to test it, but I warned him the shaft was unstable. He went down anyway. The collapse took him before we could pull him out. The state called it an accident, but Derek was there that day. He wanted the land clear. He said one man's life was a small price for a fortune. Ethan felt the air drain from the room. His hand trembled slightly as he closed the book. His father hadn't died in a car crash like his mother always said. He died here on this land under that ridge chasing the gold that had destroyed 2 generations. He looked toward Henry, the man's face, ghost pale against the firelight. "You knew my father," he said quietly. Henry's stirred eyes fluttering open. "Your father." His voice was dry, barely a whisper. David Cole." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's right." Henry's cracked lips trembled into a faint, pained smile. "I thought so," he murmured. "The way you move, the way you talk to that dog." His breathing grew ragged. "You're his son, aren't you? You're David's boy." Ethan didn't answer at first. The words hung between them, heavy as the smoke curling from the hearth. He hadn't heard that name spoken like that in years, not since before his father vanished. "You worked with him," he asked, his voice low. "You were partners." Henry nodded faintly. He's unfocused, lost somewhere in memory. He was the only man I trusted down there. He cared more about the work than the gold. We were trying to map the fault lines, make it safe. But Derek..." His words faltered, swallowed by exhaustion. "Derek wanted it open no matter what. He said the gold would outlast the graves." Ethan leaned forward. "You're saying Derek caused the collapse? My father's death?" Henry didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the window, fear returning like a shadow crossing the room. "He doesn't forget," Henry whispered. "He knows who comes near the ridge. He has men. He'll find out you're here." Rex gave a low growl again, his body-shifting nose twitching toward the door. Ethan stood heart-pounding. The storm outside had stopped completely, but the forest felt alive with quiet tension, the kind that came before movement. He looked down at the journal in his hand, the one filled with coordinates and ghosts, the ridge where his father vanished, the mine Derek would kill to claim, and the old man who might not live long enough to tell the rest. Ethan tightened his grip on the book, forcing his voice steady. "You're going to be all right," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Henry's eyes fluttered again, and in a faint, trembling whisper he said, "You look just like him." The fire cracked, and Ethan turned toward the sound nerves wired tight. Outside, the world was silent again, too silent. He caught his reflection in the frosted glass, a soldier standing in someone else's war holding a map that led straight into the heart of his own past. Rex stood beside him, tail stiff eyes fixed on the dark beyond the door. Somewhere in the trees, something shifted. The sound came first as a tremor through the snow, low and distant like thunder, buried beneath the frozen earth. Ethan stiffened his hand, hovering over the rifle slung against the table. The faint rumble grew louder, sharper, turning into the unmistakable growl of an engine laboring through the cold. He moved to the window and peeled back the edge of the curtain. Through the gray veil of trees, a dark truck crawled along the narrow trail, its headlights cutting pale streaks through the mist. His gut clenched. Someone was coming. He turned to Henry, who was half awake, his breath shallow. "Who else knows about this place?" he whispered. Henry's eyes fluttered open, fear blooming instantly across his face. "It's him," he rasped. "It's Derek. He comes every few days. You need to hide." Ethan felt his pulse surge. "He doesn't know I'm here," he said quietly. "Let's keep it that way." He looked to Rex, who was already standing, muscles tensed, nose to the wind. The dog's body vibrated with a low growl that rumbled deep in his chest, an animal recognition of a familiar enemy. Ethan helped Henry ease off the bed, wrapping him in a blanket. "Stay quiet," he whispered, guiding him toward the narrow crawl space beneath the bed frame, half covered with loose boards and a torn rug. Henry hesitated. "He'll kill you if he sees you." "Let's not give him the chance," Ethan said. He moved quickly, checking the chamber of his rifle, then crouched behind the kitchen counter, near the door. Rex stayed low beside him, eyes locked on the sound outside. The engine cut abruptly. Silence rushed back, heavy and complete. Then came the crunch of boots on snow. Slow, measured, too deliberate. Ethan's heart drummed against his ribs as the footsteps approached the porch. The doorknob rattled once, twice, and then turned. The door swung open with a creak that sliced through the quiet. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy parka dusted with frost. His face was unshaven, the lines deep and sharp. His movements casual in a way that reeked of control. Derek Harper. Ethan recognized the type immediately, the kind of man who smiled while counting the angles in a room. Derek paused just inside the threshold, scanning the cabin. His eyes landed on the open cuffs hanging from the bedpost. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping forward. His voice was smooth, practiced the tone of someone used to lying. "Uncle Henry?" He called it out softly. Mock concern layered beneath the words. "Jesus, old man, what did you do now?" He crossed the floor, feigning exasperation, glancing around as if expecting his captive to appear. "Henry, you in here?" "God, the door's wide open. Someone could've." His words stopped when his gaze caught the bed. The blanket was rumpled, the cuffs empty. Ethan held his breath. Derek's face shifted, confusion flickering for only a moment before calculation replaced it. He crouched, touching the loose boards near the bed. His hand came away dusty. "Smart old bastard," he murmured. "You finally found a way out." He stood slowly, turning toward the center of the room. That was when he saw Rex. The dog stood near the table, body-stiff eyes locked on him. For a brief second, Derek froze, his expression cracking open just enough for something raw to show through. Shock, then fear. "No," he whispered. "You're dead?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. "I buried you myself." The sound of his voice seemed to ignite something in Rex. The dog snarled, teeth bared, a deep guttural sound that made Derek stumble back a step. Ethan rose from behind the counter, rifle raised. "You might want to start explaining that," he said evenly. Derek spun toward the voice, instinctively lifting his hands halfway before catching himself. His gaze darted from Ethan to the rifle, to Rex, and back again. Then came the smile, cold, practiced, dangerous. "Well," he said slowly, "this is new." Ethan's eyes never left him. "You, Derek Harper." Derek nodded once. "And you are the guy holding the gun," Ethan said. "Fair point," Derek replied, voice steady. "Mind telling me what you're doing in my cabin?" "Your cabin," Ethan scoffed. "Funny I found your uncle chained to that bed." Derek laughed softly, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. "You've got it all wrong. Henry's not well. He has these episodes, paranoia, memory loss. Thinks I'm stealing from him. I brought him here to keep him safe until I can get him help." "Safe?" Ethan's tone hardened. By starving him and locking him up, Derek spread his hands, mock offense dripping from his words. "You think I wanted this? The man's been losing his mind for years. I'm just trying to protect what's left of the family business." "That business include trying to kill a dog?" Ethan asked. Derek's gaze flicked to Rex again, jaw tightening. "That thing isn't a dog," he said quietly. "It's a problem I already solved once." Ethan's finger twitched on the trigger. "Say that again?" "You heard me," Derek said. His calm returned, but his eyes stayed sharp, tracking every inch of the room, every breath Ethan took. Rex and Henry were both supposed to stay buried with the past, but some people just don't know when to quit. He took a slow step forward. "You don't know what you've walked into, friend. That journal you've got, it's worth more than you can imagine. So why don't we make this easy? Hand it over and I'll forget you were ever here." Ethan didn't move. The fire popped behind them, sending a small shower of sparks into the air. The smell of smoke mingled with the metallic scent of tension. Rex shifted his stance, growl deepening. Derek's eyes narrowed. "You're David Cole's boy, aren't you?" The name hit Ethan like ice water. His jaw tightened. Derek smiled faintly. "Yeah, I thought so. You've got his look." He was stubborn, too. The room seemed to shrink. "You knew my father?" Ethan said, voice low, dangerous. "Knew him?" Derek chuckled. "I watched him die." Rex lunged before Ethan could move, the sound of teeth snapping against air, breaking the moment apart. Derek staggered back, hitting the table, his hand darting for his jacket pocket. Ethan reacted instinctively, leveling the rifle, the barrel tracking the motion. "Don't," he said sharply. Derek froze, hands raised again, face smooth but eyes burning. Outside, the wind began to howl through the trees, the first flakes of snow swirling past the open doorway. The world beyond the cabin dimmed into gray, and inside the air turned electric, every breath drawn thin and tight as wire. Derek's smile returned colder now. "You've got no idea what's coming, soldier." Derek's smirk lingered like smoke, the kind that stung your eyes but never quite disappeared. He adjusted his stance, stepping sideways, keeping the table between him and Ethan. "You mind putting that gun down, soldier?" His voice was smooth, almost friendly, but the edge beneath it could cut glass. Ethan didn't move. "Not until you tell me why your uncle was chained to that bed." Derek exhaled the sound, sharp in the cold air that leaked through the cracks in the cabin walls. "I already told you he's sick. Has been for years. Paranoid dementia, the doctors said. Started thinking I was stealing from him, hiding things, trying to poison him. I brought him here because he was a danger to himself." He gave a small, rehearsed laugh. "Hell, if you'd seen the state he was in before, you'd have done the same." Ethan's expression didn't shift. "You call starving and cuffing someone taking care of them?" Derek's jaw tightened, the faint charm cracking. "You don't get it. The old man's got money, real money, locked up in that mining deed. He refuses to let go. The land's sitting on a fortune, and he's content to rot while everyone else suffers. I've tried to reason with him." "By force," Ethan said. Derek's smile faltered. "Sometimes that's the only language people understand." Rex growled, a low rumble vibrating through the room. Derek's eyes flicked toward the dog, and for the briefest second his mask slipped, fear. He recovered quickly, stepping closer to the hearth, hands spread in mock surrender. "Look, I don't know who you are or what your angle is, but this doesn't concern you. You've stumbled into something old and ugly, and you don't want to make it your problem." Ethan's tone stayed calm, controlled. "It became my problem when I found him dying in that bed." "Then, congratulations," Derek said softly. "You just inherited a war that's not yours." The wind outside slammed against the cabin, rattling the window panes. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. "Where are the other men?" Derek cocked his head. "What men? The ones you said help you manage the property. The ones who protect your uncle." Derek's silence was answer enough. He smiled, the kind that didn't touch his eyes. "They come when I call." "And what happens when they do?" Ethan asked. "We bury another Cole under the snow." The name hit Derek like a slap. He blinked once, then grinned. "So he told you, did he, about the mine? About your old man?" He took a slow step forward, voice lowering. "David Cole was a good worker. Brave, stupid, loyal. Just like you. He went into that shaft because he thought he could fix what wasn't broken. The collapse wasn't my fault. It was his choice." Ethan's jaw set the old ache flaring behind his ribs. "You left him down there?" "He was already dead," Derek said flatly. "And don't pretend like you'd have done anything different. The world doesn't stop for one man's grave. It moves on. That's how you survive." Ethan's eyes darkened, his voice quiet but sharp. "No, that's how you rot." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The fire hissed and snapped. Then Derek laughed again, softer this time. "You sound just like him. The same righteous nonsense. You think you're the hero in this story, soldier? You think you can save the old man, take the dog walk away clean?" Ethan didn't answer. He lowered the rifle slightly, just enough to shift his stance, calculating distance, weight, reaction time. "I'm taking him to town," he said evenly. "He needs a doctor. You're going to stay out of the way." Derek's head tilted, curiosity flickering. "You really think you're walking out of here with him?" He stepped back toward the door, and for a moment Ethan thought he might actually leave. But Derek's hand slipped into his coat pocket, and when it came out, it wasn't empty. The black barrel of a revolver gleamed in the firelight, steady, deliberate. "You're not taking anything," Derek said quietly. The rifle came up instantly, Ethan's instincts kicking before thought. The two men froze, guns leveled, breath hanging between them. Rex barked once, sharp and furious. Derek's eyes flicked toward the sound, and that split-second distraction told Ethan everything he needed to know. This wasn't the first time Derek had used fear to win. "Put it down," Ethan said. "We don't have to do this." "Oh, we do," Derek said. "You just don't realize it yet." He shifted his aim not at Ethan, but at Rex. "He dies first. The words tore through the air like a match to dry grass. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Don't," he warned, voice breaking its calm for the first time. "He's just a dog." Derek's smile sharpened. "That dog cost me a lot of money. He's the reason Henry's still breathing. He's the reason you're standing here instead of buried with your old man." He cocked the hammer. The sound was soft, but final. Rex growled, stepping between Ethan and the gun, his body low, ready to strike. "You shoot him," Ethan said quietly, "and you'll never leave this cabin." Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. "We'll see about that." Outside, the wind howled, drowning the rest of the world. Inside, time slowed. Ethan saw everything in fragments. The gleam of the revolver, the flash of firelight across Derek's eyes, the muscles coiling in Rex's shoulders, the silence before impact. He shifted his weight, ready to move, every instinct from every battlefield roaring back into life as the cabin held its breath. The gun went off first, deafening inside the small cabin. The flash lit the walls in white for a heartbeat, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Ethan dove sideways, pulling Rex down with him as the bullet shattered a lamp hanging near the hearth. Glass exploded oil, splattering across the floorboards. Derek fired again, the round tearing through the chair where Ethan had stood a moment ago. The rifle barked back once, a warning shot that shattered the wooden frame above the door. "You can't win this," Derek shouted, voice half fury, half fear. Ethan didn't answer. He rolled behind the table, gripping the rifle tight, the heat of the burning oil already crawling across the floor. The spilled kerosene licked upward, catching on a stack of old papers near the stove. Flames burst to life, orange and hungry, feeding on years of dust and neglect. Derek stepped back, covering his mouth as smoke thickened. "You idiot," he coughed. "You'll burn us all." Ethan stayed, low eyes searching for Henry. The old man had fallen near the bed, coughing weakly. "Henry," Ethan called. The man's hand twitched. Ethan threw the rifle over his shoulder and rushed toward him, the heat biting his face. Rex followed close, barking through the smoke. Derek cursed and lunged for the door, but a beam from the ceiling groaned and collapsed, blocking his path. Flames spread faster now, racing up the walls. The air shimmered alive with sparks. Ethan reached Henry, pulling him upright. The man's weight was nothing bone, and will barely holding together. "We're getting out," Ethan said through gritted teeth. Henry tried to speak but could only cough. "Don't leave him," he rasped, nodding toward Derek. Ethan glanced back. The man was trapped behind the fallen beam, his coat sleeve already catching fire. For a second, Ethan hesitated. Every instinct screamed to move, to save himself, to get Henry out before the roof gave way. But something in the old man's voice, something human, made him turn back. He grabbed a nearby chair, swung it hard against the beam, clearing enough space for Derek to crawl. The man stumbled forward, eyes wild, one side of his face blistered red. "Go," Ethan shouted. Derek didn't need telling twice. He pushed past him towards the window, smashing through the glass with his arm and tumbling into the snow outside. Ethan turned to follow, but the fire roared, devouring the room in seconds. The ceiling cracked overhead, dropping chunks of burning wood. The smoke was so thick it burned his lungs. "Rex," he called, voice raw. The dog barked in response, darting toward the corner of the cabin, teeth tugging at something half buried under debris. Not now, Ethan barked, but Rex refused to move. He growled, pulling harder until something metallic slid free from beneath a charred board, a small steel box dented and blackened with age. Rex bit down on the edge of Ethan's jacket, tugging insistently toward the door. Ethan grabbed the box, slinging Henry's arm over his shoulder. All right, he gasped, stumbling toward the opening. The world had turned to fire and noise, the heat pressing in like a living thing. They crashed through what was left of the doorway, collapsing into the snow outside. The cold bit into his skin, shocking and clean. Henry gasped, air rasping through his throat. Ethan laid him gently down, coughing, hard eyes watering. Behind them, the cabin was a wall of flame smoke, billowing into the sky like a black flag. Derek was sprawled a few feet away. Half his jacket burned, his face streaked with soot. He rolled onto his side, groaning. Ethan pushed up onto one knee, reaching for the rifle that had fallen nearby. Stay down, he warned, voice hoarse. Derek laughed weakly, blood on his teeth. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You have no idea what you're part of." His words broke into a cough, then a snarl. "Your old man, he started this." Ethan froze, lowering the rifle slightly. "What did you say?" Derek propped himself up, eyes blazing with something feral. "Your father stole everything. The maps, the claim, the gold. He took what belonged to my family. My father spent his life trying to reclaim it. He died broke because of him." His voice cracked fury, trembling beneath it. "I'm just taking back what's ours." Ethan stared at him through the falling snow, heart pounding. "My father was a good man," he said quietly. Derek barked a laugh. "Good men don't lie to their sons about the bodies they left buried." He gestured weakly towards the burning cabin. "You want the truth? It's in there. Or at least it was." Ethan looked down at the box, still clutched in his hand, its latch twisted but intact. The dog had saved it for a reason. "You really think this is about gold?" Ethan asked. Derek's smile was cracked and bitter. "It's always about gold." Then he collapsed face first into the snow, the firelight painting his burned skin in shades of red and black. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving, the wind whipping the smoke into long ribbons that twisted into the sky. Rex whined beside him, pressing his head against Ethan's leg. Henry stirred on the ground, his voice barely audible. He's lying," he whispered, clutching Ethan's sleeve. "David didn't steal anything. He saved me." "Rest," Ethan said, but Henry shook his head weakly. "The truth is in the ridge." His hand fell limp. Ethan stared at the old man's stillness, then at the burning cabin, the flames swallowing the roof. The heat was fading now, replaced by the bitter sting of cold and the metallic scent of ash. He opened the box. Inside, wrapped in a layer of scorched paper, were several documents, maps, mineral surveys, a deed, signed by both Henry Harper and David Cole. 2 names tied by a promise buried decades deep. The edges of the papers were singed but legible. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Part grief. Part anger. Part grim clarity. The truth was older than either of them, and it wasn't finished yet. A faint sound made him look up. Derek was gone, his footprints smearing blood across the snow leading toward the tree line. The fire behind them roared one last time as the roof caved in completely, a shower of sparks lighting the night. Ethan watched the tracks fade into the darkness, his breath coming in clouds. Somewhere ahead, a reckoning waited, and for the first time he wasn't running from it. The fire had died by morning, leaving only the skeleton of the cabin smoldering beneath a sky the color of old steel. Smoke curled into the wind, carrying with it the sharp scent of ash and something older like iron and regret. Ethan sat in the snow beside the wreckage, his hands raw, and blistered the box resting between his boots. Henry lay wrapped in Ethan's coat, his breathing ragged but still there. Rex stood guard a few feet away, his fur singed at the tips, his eyes fixed on the line of trees where Derek's tracks had vanished into the wilderness. Ethan's muscles ached from the cold and from everything that had come before it. His ears still rang from gunfire and collapsing wood, his throat burned from the smoke. But it wasn't the pain that held him still, it was the papers inside the box. The names written in faded ink, the signatures of 2 men who had built something together before it all turned to dust. When Henry stirred, Ethan leaned closer. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe now." The old man coughed, eyes half opening. His voice came rough and thin. "Safe? There's no such thing anymore." "You need a doctor," Ethan said, but Henry shook his head weakly. "No. No more running. I need you to listen." He tried to sit up, grimacing from the effort. Ethan steadied him. "Your father, David Henry, said the words, slurring slightly. He wasn't what Derek thinks he was. He didn't steal anything. He saved it. Saved me." Ethan frowned. "You told me you were partners." Henry nodded faintly. "We found the vein together. Half the ridge belonged to me, half to him. We agreed to keep it closed until the land stabilized." Then Derek's father came along. He saw the money, saw the chance to dig deeper, faster. We refused. He called us cowards. His eyes glazed for a moment, chasing memories through smoke. That day the shaft collapsed. I was trapped under the beams. Couldn't move. Thought I'd die down there. But your father went back in. Everyone told him not to. The tunnel was ready to give. He swallowed hard, his hand trembling as he pointed toward the remains of the cabin. He pulled me out, one arm, broken lungs full of dust. Then the ground gave again. He pushed me clear before it fell. I never saw him after that. Ethan felt his throat close. The memory he never had, the story his mother never told, filled the silence like thunder. "So he died saving you," Ethan said softly. Henry's eyes filled the lines on his face, deepening. "I've lived half my life trying to make it right. I built this company to honor him, but Derek's father filled his head with lies. Said David cheated us, that he stole the deed. When I refused to reopen the mine, Derek called me a traitor to my own blood. He said if I wouldn't reclaim what was ours, he would." Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, the cold biting through his gloves. "He thinks I'm part of it, that I'm here to finish what my father started." Henry managed a faint nod. "He knows who you are now. He'll come for you." The words hung between them, heavy with certainty. Ethan looked at the horizon where the tree line met the snow. The world was quiet, but not safe. Somewhere out there, Derek was still breathing. Still planning. "Let him try," Ethan said under his breath. Henry smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You sound like David." He coughed again, weaker this time. "You have his stubbornness, his heart." Ethan stared at the fire's remains. "My mother told me he died in an accident overseas. She said it was better that way, cleaner. She wanted to protect you," Henry whispered. "There's nothing clean about what happened here." He reached out fingers, brushing Ethan's sleeve. "The mine, it's cursed ground now. Buried men, buried truth. But if you go there, you'll see what he died for. The real map is in that box." Ethan glanced at it, the papers still fluttering faintly in the wind. The inked lines drew the shape of the ridge, the tunnels beneath a red X, marking the north shaft where everything had begun. He closed it carefully, his reflection faint in the steel. "He saved you," Ethan said quietly, "and now I'm going to end what killed him." Henry's grip tightened weakly. "Be careful. Derek's not his father. He's worse. He doesn't care about the gold anymore. It's pride now. He thinks your father took his legacy. He'll destroy anything that reminds him he's wrong." Rex barked, suddenly snapping Ethan's head toward the trees. A dark shape moved briefly at the edge of the forest before melting back into shadow. Ethan's stomach turned cold. "He's watching," he murmured. Henry's hand fell away, limp again, his voice faint as smoke. "He'll come for you, Ethan. Promise me you'll finish what your father started. Promise me you'll make it right." Ethan didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, every sense sharpening again. The snow had begun to fall lightly, flakes drifting through the rising smoke. He felt the weight of the rifle across his back, the box heavy in his hands, the dog pressed close to his side. The past had finally drawn its circle closed, and now it was only a matter of time before everything inside that circle burned or was redeemed. He stood brushing the frost from his knees. "You rest," he told Henry quietly. "I'll handle him." The old man's eyes opened one last time, distant but clear. "He won't stop. Not until one of you's gone." The words faded into a whisper, then into the cold. Ethan stood over him, silent, the smoke rising between them like a veil. Rex whined, softly nudging Henry's arm, as if trying to wake him. Ethan knelt, closing the man's eyes with a trembling hand. "He saved you," he said softly. "Now I'll save what's left." A faint echo reached them, then a snap of a twig, the grind of snow under boots. Ethan's head turned toward it, muscles tightening, heart steadying into that familiar rhythm he hadn't felt since combat. He rose slowly, pulling the rifle free, the cold metal steady in his grip. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, casting the snow in the color of old fire. Somewhere out there, Derek was waiting. And this time Ethan wasn't running from the ghosts. He was walking straight into them, straight. The sun had already melted away the last traces of the storm when the sheriff's truck pulled up beside the charred ruins of the cabin. The snow was trampled now, streaked with soot and the dark lines of tire tracks. Ethan stood beside what was left of the fire pit, his rifle slung over one shoulder, the steel box locked inside his pack. Rex sat near his boots, ears flicking every time a voice carried on the wind. Henry was alive, wrapped in a thick blanket in the back of the sheriff's truck, an oxygen tank at his side, his face pale but peaceful. The medics had done what they could. The rest would be time. "You sure you're okay, son?" the sheriff asked, adjusting his hat as he studied Ethan's bruised jaw. "You've been through hell." Ethan gave a faint nod. "I've seen worse." The sheriff glanced toward the woods. "We found him, about a mile north, half burned, half frozen, still had a gun on him. He tried to run when we called out." Ethan looked away toward the ridge where the snow glistened beneath the pale light. "Derek Harper. That's the one the sheriff said. He's alive, but he won't be walking right for a while. We're taking him in on charges of attempted murder, unlawful confinement, and arson. Maybe more depending on what that old man says once he's stronger." Ethan let out a slow breath, the sound fading into the quiet. Justice didn't feel clean. It never did, but it was enough for now. Henry had survived, and Derek's hatred had burned itself out. The sheriff looked back towards the wreckage. "We'll send a crew up here tomorrow to finish clearing it out." "What about you? I'm staying," Ethan said simply. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You sure after all this?" Ethan nodded. "It's not about the gold. This land's part of something bigger. My father died here trying to save someone. I'm not leaving it to rot." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Your father must have been a hell of a man." "He was," Ethan said quietly. The sheriff tipped his hat. "We'll check on you in a few days. You take care of that old man, you hear?" Ethan nodded again as the truck engine started snow crunching under the tires as it turned down the mountain road. When the sound finally disappeared, the forest fell back into silence, broken only by the soft sigh of wind through the pines. Ethan knelt beside Rex, rubbing the fur between the dog's ears. "Guess it's just us again, huh?" Rex tilted his head, then licked the scar on Ethan's hand. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "I miss him too." Later, as dusk settled over the mountains, Ethan helped Henry into the restored cabin, the one that had once belonged to his grandmother. The repairs had taken weeks, each board replaced by hand, every nail driven with the quiet rhythm of healing. It wasn't the same as before, but it was warm, sturdy, alive again. Henry sat by the new fireplace, its flames soft and golden against the walls. Rex stretched out beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Ethan poured tea and handed Henry a mug, then sat across from him, the steel box resting open on the table between them. Inside were the cleaned and pressed documents, the old photographs, and a folded American flag that had once draped David Cole's empty casket. Henry's gaze lingered on it for a long time. "I thought I'd never see the day when this land would hold peace again," he said quietly. "It's strange, isn't it? How much pain can grow from a single promise." "Maybe that's how you know the promise mattered," Ethan said. "If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be worth keeping." Henry nodded, eyes glistening in the firelight. "Your father would have liked you." "Same eyes. Same damn conviction." He looked down at his hands, gnarled but steady. "I spent 50 years running from guilt, trying to buy forgiveness with money I didn't even want. But you just came and did what was right." "I didn't do it for redemption," Ethan said. "I did it because it needed to be done." "That's exactly what he would have said," Henry murmured with a faint smile. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, the snow outside reflecting orange light through the windows. Then Henry leaned back, his voice faint but steady. "You'll keep it, won't you, the land?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I'll keep it. Not for the gold, though. For him. For what he tried to protect." Henry's eyes closed briefly, as if in relief. "Good. Maybe now it can be something better than a graveyard." The fire shifted, a log collapsing inward with a hiss. Rex lifted his head, sniffing the air before relaxing again. Henry reached down to pat him. "You saved me." "You know," he said softly, "and he saved you." Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe that's how it's supposed to work. One life at a time. Henry's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Maybe he whispered, maybe the world still has room for men like you, and dogs like him. Ethan looked at the fire, the words sinking deep into him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of war pressing on his shoulders. The nightmares had quieted. The ghosts that used to follow him through every dark night had finally lost their voice. There was still loss, still memory, but it no longer hurt to remember. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the scars of the past with something clean. Ethan stood and walked to the window, watching the flakes drift down through the pines. The ridge looks different now, Henry said from behind him. Peaceful. Ethan nodded. Maybe it's finally done. Rex Rosen joined him, pressing against his leg. The warmth from the fire and the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing grounded him in a way nothing else ever had. He turned back to Henry, who was watching the flames with a tired smile. Get some rest, Ethan said gently. We'll start fresh in the morning. Henry nodded, setting his mug aside. You too, son. As Ethan stoked the fire one last time, he felt the quiet settle deep into the walls of the cabin, not empty, but full of warmth of memory of something unspoken that finally had a place to belong. Rex curled up by the hearth, his chest rising and falling with slow, contented breaths. Henry's eyes fluttered closed, his voice barely audible, but carrying through the quiet like a benediction. You saved me, Ethan, and he saved you. Maybe the world still has room for men like you. Ethan sat back in the chair opposite him, watching the flames dance, the dog sigh softly, and the snow fall beyond the window. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The past was still there, but now so was peace. If this story moved, you make sure to hit like and subscribe for more incredible tales. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What twist surprised you the most? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and share your story.